What's the little one's name? Your daughter? Lillian. Annecy. It reminded me of when I started out pastoring. Bless her little heart. I started out in a little country church. I mean country. And it was just a small church. There were not many members, but it was kind of packed out every Sunday morning because there wasn't many people in the community, and everybody came. Had only a couple of families with young children, and didn't really have a nursery or anything like that. But they would bring them into the sanctuary, and it never bothered me having young people in the service or little ones in the service. I was kind of oblivious. I didn't know where I was at anyway, so it didn't really matter. And I did have one couple come in. They were good members in the church, and they had a little 5-year-old boy. And, a little 5-year-old, they're pretty rambunctious. And so I watched them, and I was starting to preach that morning, and they had come in, and they were sitting on the back row. And the back row, not that far from the front row, because I could see them pretty good. But anyway, as they sat there, she had brought a Viewmaster. Now, some of you older people know what a Viewmaster is. It was a slide thing, and she had brought that, and she gave it to him when I started preaching, and he was just looking at these slides. I thought, what a great idea. They were thinking about the little one, and they brought that for him. And so I continued to preach, and the little boy, after about 5 minutes, put it down and started listening to me. I thought, man, I am on it now. I'm preaching, and I'm reaching the back row. Well, there was an older gentleman sitting next to them, and when the little boy put the Viewmaster down, he picked it up. He didn't just look at one slide. He looked at all of them. So I said, Lord, I know. Sometimes you get puffed up in what you're doing, and sometimes you just get deflated. But I thought, blessed are the little children, and the old people shall see visions through a Viewmaster. We're back in chapter 12 tonight. I wanted to look at Abraham's life and call there in a little more depth, because I think Abraham is one of the great characters in the Old Testament. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the promises that God made to Abraham are still valid today, in the covenant that God made with Abraham. Still the covenant that God has with Israel, with the Jewish people today. He promised, and he made the promises to him. So I'm just going to start there at verse 1, read some of these verses, and comment on them a little bit tonight as we go through chapter 12, maybe 13 and 14. I think we can get that far along. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Get thee out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. And in you all of the families of the earth shall be blessed." And so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, all their possessions, all that they gathered, to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land in the place of Shechem as far as Terebinth, the land's house. They stayed together in clans, but God called Abram to go out. Usually only the ones who left their family and left their country were fugitives, who were running away and trying to hide. Abram's not doing that. He's following God, and he's following the call of God in his life. Abram had to take that step. He had to leave his family. He had to leave his country, and he had to go out. And as Hebrews puts it in chapter 11, he went out not knowing where he was going, but he looked for a city whose builder and maker is God. So Abraham only had that God had called him. And here God is making a covenant with Abraham, and God has promised him to be a great nation. name would live on after his death, and surely that has come to pass. They are a great nation, Israel, and yet Abraham's name is remembered and revered. Abram was commanded to be a blessing to others, and not only to bless others, but he would be blessing the whole world. It goes beyond the scope of family or a tribe or Israel as a nation, but God said Abram's seed would bless the whole world. And of course, when Messiah came, Messiah is our blessing that God sent to Abram, that all the families of the earth would be blessed. God also said that he would bless those who bless Abram and his tribe, and curse those who cursed him. And people today feel like that's that God's hand is upon Israel, because that blessing of God is still there. That covenant was without. It's not a covenant that had an end to it. It's still. So I think it's important that we do. And I know the leaders in any country, Israel included, are not perfect. We see that through the Old Testament. They do things and say things that probably aren't what God wants out of them, but we are to still pray for Israel and to try to be a blessing to Israel. I think the United States of America has been one of the few countries who've tried to do that and still tries to do that. And of course, because we have that mandate from Christ to love our neighbor as ourselves. Those who curse Israel, I think we have a precursor here of what God's judgment is going to come on the world as they in the revel. And those today who I think are standing against Israel have found it to be something that they're not able to do. The most amazing thing, and I've gone back and studied it in the 60s, was the Six-Day War and the miracles that happened in that Six-Day War. How a little ragtag army of Israel that was just formed and had basically very, very few armaments and weapons and planes defeated all of those who were coming against him from Egypt and from countries round about. And it was quite a blessing, quite a thing to have happened. But as I studied and looked at Abraham's life, just giving you the macro. We call Abraham the man of faith. He was a man of faith. He was a man who followed God. But Abram had a lot of obstacles ahead of him, and a lot of them that we'll be looking at later on. And I'll just go through some of those. Of course, we know Sarah, his wife, was barren. God had promised him seed, but she was barren. She couldn't have a child. Abraham leaves the promised land and over here in chapter 12 to go to Egypt because of a famine. That caused some problems. Abraham's life was endangered in Egypt. One reason, because he lied about his wife. And then Abraham's nephew Lot quarreled with him over the land, and they had to separate. Abraham enters wars because Lot was captured and he had to go rescue him. Abraham's life was in danger during that time as he traveled through the promised land. He thought Eliezer, his servant, would be the heir, since Sarah was not able to have children. That's over in chapter 15. And then Sarah said for him to take her maid, which was Hagar, and he had a son by Hagar, which was named Ishmael. He thought that was going to be his heir. So that's two that he thought, but God had said, it's going to be your seed. You are the one. The other that they think that may have Abraham probably thought would be heir was Lot, because he had taken Lot as a son and kind of adopted him after Haran had died. So Abram had all of these things in the way, and yet he still didn't have the heir. As a matter of fact, he had Lot and he had Ishmael, who he thought would be heirs. And then when he did have Isaac and their old age, God calls him to sacrifice Isaac. And God had promised that his seed would be blessed, and then he's calling him to sacrifice him. We'll look at that later on. And then Abraham could not find the proper wife for Isaac, and that was one of the last things we see in the life of Abraham, that he was looking, and he sent out his servant to find a wife for his son Isaac. So Abraham's life, he was a man of faith, but he had a lot of struggles and a lot that he had to endure. There was a lot that he had to go through to find that heir, to get that heir of the promise of God. So verse 7 there, I just want to point out that that is one of several what they call theophanies, pre-incarnate visit of Christ. They believe that verse 7, the Lord appeared unto Abraham. They feel like this is a pre-incarnate visit of Christ. This also happened to Jacob, happens to Abraham several times, and they believe that these were appearances of Christ before he was incarnated into the world. In verse 7, that he's making the promises to Abraham. Another thing about Abram that we see until God changes his name to Abraham, that Abram is always building altars. Everywhere he goes, he builds an altar and he worships God. He builds an altar and he worships God. Abram is following God, where Abram comes into one of his first major problems. And I'll just pick up right there. Now there was a famine in the land of Abram. And Abram went down into Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was very severe in the land. And it came to pass that when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, "Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beauty and beautiful countenance. Therefore, it will happen when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me, but they will let you be alive. Please say that you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and I may live and because of you." So it was that Abram came to Egypt, and the Egyptians saw the woman Pharaoh. So the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep and oxen, male donkeys, and male and female servants, and Sarai, Abraham's wife. And Pharaoh also, "Why did you say, 'She is my sister'? I have taken her, and now therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way." So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent the hand of Pharaoh, because a plague came on Pharaoh's house. Interesting, there were 10 plagues that came on Pharaoh and Egypt when Moses went down to try to free them and to let them out of bondage. We don't know what the plague was. Sarah, Abram's wife, there's a lot we're not told there. Maybe he had a vision. We don't know. This plague came upon Pharaoh's house. Didn't say it was on the land of Egypt, just on Pharaoh's house. And he, some way, realized he had Abram's wife and not his sister. So it upset him very much. And when he let her go, the plague was removed from Pharaoh's house. So it's an interesting story. It parallels what we'll see, what happens later on with Israel as they're in bondage there, a whole lot, but a little bit different story. Shows too that Abram lacked faith, just like all of us. He is called the father of the faithful. He does have faith. He did leave his home. He did leave his family. He did leave everything. But then when he headed down to Egypt, he became fearful, became afraid. Or for him, and it didn't. But anyway, Abram lacked the faith to go into the. She is his wife. But when God was able to bless Abram, and it blessed him with a lot of goods. Pharaoh's house had given him a lot of things, and it freed him to go back, and he was very, very much more prosperous. By the way, in verse 16 there, it says he gave him donkeys and servants and oxen, and don't have any word about camels before he goes down to Egypt. But having a camel was a sign of being a very wealthy person. It's like having 2 or 3 Cadillacs in your yard. Amount of wealth and of prestige because God had blessed him. Even though Abram fell short, even though he lied about his wife, God still had, and I'll just begin again right there in chapter 13, verse 1.